Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time. And see, some of you have been sitting through 2 talks now and our panel. So this must really be a subject of interest to you, as it is to me and to our lovely panelists. So there might be a screen showing, you might be seeing where's Jami. Unfortunately, Jami, she was unable to attend after all. So you'll have to make do with us. But I'm also very, very happy to have such clever and also experienced people in the panel here to talk about subscriptions and share with us their knowledge. Quick introduction. I'm Teis. I'm the founder and CEO of Multiscription. We are the track sponsor here, and we're also the company behind Unleashed, which is a subscription service for mobile games. Won't go too much into that. Some of you might have seen the talk just 20 minutes ago. If you didn't, I'm sure it'll be online soon. And if not, you're curious, come downstairs. We have a booth. We come down and hear more about in-game subscription service. With that, I'll leave it to you. Hello, Maria.
Hi, I'm Maria Sayans. I'm CEO of ustwo Games. We are a UK-based studio, about 40 people based in London. And we make mainly mobile games, but also PC and console. You might know us from Monument Valley, but we also made Alba, Wildlife Adventure, and most recently, Desta, The Memories Between.
Hi, I'm Louise. Just testing to see if it's working. I'm from Ampere, which is a media and entertainment research company. I'm part of the games team there, so we've been tracking the global games market for kind of as individuals more than 15 years. So we do everything from market sizing and forecasting to consumer research and title analytics as well.
Thank you. And actually, Louise did a really interesting talk last year at this conference about subscriptions, and I'm happy to see that also the big firms or research firms are sort of getting their eyes on this. And to just dive into the topic, I would say there will be room for questions at the end. So if you have any, please note them down. I will happily answer them. So if we look at the future of mobile game subscriptions and where we're going, very high level, you where do you see us going? And maybe starting with you, Louise, since you're in the helicopter in your daily work, looking at the big trends.
So I think something that's really important to remember about games subscription services is that they're inherently very different to other entertainment services like video or music, because they have this other layer of monetization. So quite often when we look at game services, they act more as kind of user acquisition tools for the players to then go in and spend more money on in-app purchases and things like that. So when we think about games services specifically and not in-game subscriptions, this is an area that we see growing. So last year, I think game subscription services represented around between 5 and 6% of total spend on games content and services globally. And again, that is an area that's growing. We did see a decline in general last year, but subscription services are on the rise. But I don't think they're not going to become kind of dominant anytime soon, I would say. I think one of the issues with games subscription services is that churn tends to be quite high, and I think that's maybe even more of a problem on the mobile platform, because arguably the games tend to be kind of shorter. And I think if you have a service with quite high churn, it's then quite difficult to scale that service to a point where it becomes a kind of dominant force in terms of gamer spending.
Quick follow-up question before we go to you, Maria. Is that when
sure.
you talk about these services, maybe just for everyone understands, you're talking across mobile and console and PC. When you talk about these services and the trends, do you see any differences between the different platforms in these services?
I think it's quite difficult. So I'm talking about services specifically there. So in-game subscriptions are a very different thing. And I think possibly in a more positive space at the moment versus the services themselves. I think Game Pass has really been kind of pioneering game subscriptions, and it's really been reshaping game subscriptions as we know them. And I think on the mobile front, it's probably a little bit less, there's less of a kind of leader in the space. I mean, of course, we have Apple Arcade, but I think Game Pass is really driving things forward for subscriptions in general.
Maria, what does the future look like from your chair?
So we're traditionally a premium mobile games developer, and a few years ago we launched Assemble with Care as a day one title with Apple Arcade, and then we followed that up with Alba, and most recently we've done Desktop with Netflix, and I think that our experience with subscriptions in the mobile space has been fantastic, and I think it really, quite honestly, premium mobile gaming was probably a business that, unless you're a party game, wasn't really there anymore. Not for the kind of premium games with a development budget and polish in the time that it takes us to make our games. So I think that subscriptions have worked extremely well for us, and we've worked really well with both our partners. We also put Monument Valley 1 and 2 on Google Play Pass, and so we've seen on Monument Valley 1 and 2 subscriptions as a great way to extend the life cycle of our games, and then just working to develop titles for both Apple Arcade and for Netflix as a great way to give us a lot of creative freedom, a way to keep our IP, a way to give a lot of stability for the teams and certainty, but also a platform for them to take those games to PC and console. And the core of our games still is pretty much mobile, but being able to bring these IPs into PC and console is also another positive of the experience for us. So, so far a really fantastic experience. I do think that, from what's the future of that perspective, I think consumers love subscriptions. It gives them a way to navigate the amount of content that is out there. And I think that a great subscription service is a great, at its best, is a great curation service. And I think that's perhaps one of the things that as a consumer I value the most. I don't have the time to research all of the content that is out there. But it gives me a certain sort of, allowance of this is how much money I'm spending, and these are the kind of things that are coming out. So I think from that perspective, a lot of families love them, a lot of players love them, and I think it'll be an increasingly important part of the business, and definitely for us, and a really important part of our business model. But we have to be very careful not to become overly dependent on subscriptions.
Really, really interesting. I think, first of all, I think you could put money and value in a McDonald's Happy Meal and it'll still be a good success.
That's a great idea.
Yes. I just think it's not just the service, but also I think very undervalued is still the quality of the games. So there's no silver bullet in just putting it on one of the services. And that's something I want to touch upon later as we talk about the requirements. Actually, you just don't put it in a service and then it works. So that's really interesting. But one thing I wanted to maybe you could elaborate a bit on is you talked about putting your game, it works on the other platforms as well. So do you see that as a benefit that you have the business model for your mobile game? It's a subscription. It easily translates to PC console. Is that sort of the logic behind that?
I wouldn't say it easily translates, and I think ultimately there's a very strong connection between games and the business model they're built for. So there's always a bit of a compromise when you're taking a game from one business model to another. It's not going to be platform perfect. It's not going to be business model perfect. But having said that, I think there's quite a bit of an overlap. And I think that, funnily enough, one of the things that we found is that the industry is still pretty snobbish about mobile games. So being able to present our games as a game that comes out on mobile and PC and console makes it be perceived as a real game from the very beginning, and gets us access to coverage and awards and just opinion formers in a way that as a purely mobile game might be a little bit harder. So I think there's definitely a good positive relationship by being able to bring those games. I mean, just for context, our games are single-player games, so I'm not talking about if you're a multiplayer game, there's all the challenges but also all the benefits. But even just purely as a single-player game, we see benefits there.
Nice. Staying a bit on the difference between the different types of subscriptions you guys were talking about, and please both chip in. You talked about the in-game subscription, the subscription services, and I touched upon this in my talk previously, is that Apple Arcade is almost like a publisher, right? It's almost like a publisher subscription you have. Different type of publisher, a very powerful one, but nonetheless it works in the way that they publish the game, etc. And there are some inherent differences in that, and then you have console on the other side. Do you have any thoughts on the difference between that? Just because it's a completely new topic for most of us, because we're just entering into subscription. As you said, Louise, it's still a small revenue, sort of overall globally compared to in-app purchases, etc. What do you guys think about the different types? Any considerations that a company should have? Any considerations you made between those?
Yeah, I think we're still kind of establishing a best practice in terms of subscription services. I think there's such a huge variety in terms of the types of deals that can be done and that kind of thing, because it's so immature compared to other areas, like I said. Can you repeat the last?
I was just talking about the differences in the types of services.
Yeah,
what kind of considerations? You talked a little bit about it, like when do you want to put your game on a service like Apple Arcade or Netflix, which I think is again it's more like almost like a publisher model, or do you want to create your own in-game subscription? Do you want to put it into? I mean, I know there's a difference with Apple Arcade. It's more similar to Xbox Game Pass, you could say. Netflix is a bit different. Any kind of considerations from you guys on what to do as a developer?
Well, I guess Maria can probably speak more to this, but my perspective would be that I suppose if you're putting your game into a subscription service, there is perhaps this idea that, I mean, you touched on it a bit already about you have this kind of creative freedom to focus on making the kind of games that you really want to make and not so much on constantly trying to monetize whoever's playing your game. And it maybe gives you that freedom again. But I mean, I feel like as these services scale, that's going to become less and less feasible because the people who provide the services are going to be looking more towards games that keep people on their platform and keep people engaged. And so you're still going to need to be thinking about how to keep people in your game, even if you're not necessarily consistently needing to monetize them. But I don't know if like making them as replayable as possible and keeping people coming back. I don't know if that's something you noticed.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about subscriptions, obviously it's the same word, but they're sort of completely different things out there. The idea of offering a subscription in your game is something that is only available for certain types of games, but I mean, it's not even new. I was just thinking, like the first time I ever worked on a subscription, and I think that just shows my age, was on Club Pogo, like in the early 2000s, and at the time I thought, what? They're charging a subscription to people so that they can play more of the content they've already made? That's just evil genius. And the clients, like the consumers of these subscriptions back then were women, so I think as an industry we've been learning how to adapt to subscriptions for quite a while. Maybe not every game and not in every franchise. I think that one of the for developers like us, how many of you are developers, by the way? Just okay, a few developers. But but not that many. So maybe I'm gonna, what I'm about to get into might not be so relevant to you, but I think one of the things that we learned early on is that even like within a subscription, you face some of the same challenges that you face in the free-to-play space, right? You're still fighting for engagement. So I think that when we put our games for the first time, Monument Valley 1 and 2 for the first time ever on a subscription service called, was it Hatch? Remember Hatch? It was really interesting because it was also a streaming service. And what you see is that you're fighting for engagement from minute zero because there is it's so easy to jump in and out of a game. So I think that even if you're the creator of premium games and you're coming at it from some mindset of, well, I've got your attention now for the next 2 hours, no. A subscription really creates already that idea of, I really have to engage you from minute zero because the offer of so many games out there means that you will jump out in a moment. So that's just one of the things that we've learned,
I think
for example.
just jumping on that is, I think we see the same now as we saw back in 2010 to 2012 when everyone was moving from premium to free-to-play. Not everyone, obviously, but a lot of companies were. And people started understanding that they needed to create the game a bit differently. And I think we see the same. It's not just taking a premium game and putting into a service, or it's not just taking a premium game, make it free to play, and then put in a subscription into that. It does require understanding the monetization model better and understanding what it is that drives, you said, engagement. In the services that reward you on the engagement and all that, that's important for you to get your royalties. If you run your own game and you have a subscription service in your own game, you need to have retention, you need to have re-engagement, you need to have all these metrics still. And subscription is definitely not a silver bullet for those things. So if I could come back to when you had these great games and you're thinking about what to do now, what was some of the thinking that some of these guys can learn from in what the decision-making process around going into Apple Arcade and desktop and Netflix now, and just from starting out early, I think with, as you said, with Hatch was the first one, and then moving on to Apple Arcade and now Netflix. What were sort of just the thinking inside the company?
So I think what's become clear to us is that at our production values kind of level and our budget level, we need to be thinking more about retention and engagement. We couldn't, like the idea of a Monument Valley that is just a beautiful game for an hour and a half, and then I leave, and then that's it, that the game ends. Even within the context of a subscription service, that is a challenging proposition. So I think we've definitely been paying a lot more attention to engagement and replayability in our game concepts. How to do that in an elegant way, how to do that in a way that still, doesn't break the magic, is I guess the flavor that we're trying to put into what we're doing, and something that is respectful of people's time. So I think you can see that, for example, with Alba was already a game that had a lot more ability to explore and replace some of that space, a lot more systems-based gameplay. And with Desca, our most recent game, we took that even to another level, and we've been now doing content drops for the game regularly with additional modes and additional challenges, etc. So that mentality of looking how do you bring in some of that games as a service mentality is something that we've had to adapt. And I think that's probably the biggest consideration. I think another consideration for us is some of the business models. I think some of the business models converted a little bit into a cost-plus model. And I think that is not a great place to be in.
Maybe you could explain what you mean by a cost-plus model. I know what you mean.
Yes. So what I mean by that is that the business model is you know, you tell me how much it costs, and you charge me a premium on that, and that's how much money you're going to make out of this game. The challenge with that is that for the industry going forward, as developers, we really need to be, you know, be able to take risks and innovate. And that kind of model, which is how TV operates and film operates, is not a model that is very conducive, is that the word, conducive, to risk taking. And not only that, it's a little bit dangerous as well, because I think a lot of the developers don't really understand their full cost basis, and there's a lot of small developers out there that are getting themselves into this kind of hamster wheel of one deal and another deal and another deal, and they never have the opportunity to just achieve a little bit of sort of returns above that gives them the perspective to really invest on their next game.
It's a really interesting point, and I'm now even more sad that Jami isn't here, because Lab Game, that she is the CEO of, actually has a game that's integrated with Unleashed. And one of the things we talked about, her and I, is that what we want to avoid is the cost-plus model, because ours is an open-ended model. It's an additional revenue stream that we designed specifically for that reason, because we don't want it to be like capped at how much you can make. And one of the things I also talked about, just to plug my previous talk, is that I talked about there was you should still have upsell. You still have in-app purchases in these type of free-to-play games, so you can still have that. So don't cap it at the cost-plus model. One thing I want to make sure we talk about, which is extremely important, of course, in a subscription, where it's a lot about retention, is of course the opposite, churn. And Louise, you started talking a bit about it, and you mentioned it as one of the big problems right now we have in games is the churn.
Yeah, so as part of our consumer research, we ask people about why they churned from certain game subscription services. And the top reasons are always, I only signed up to play a single game, is very, very popular. And again, you know, people are leaving, and so it's preventing these kinds of services from scaling. Another one is that people want to go where their friends are, so they left because their friends were on a different platform. And I think even if you're not using the service to play a multiplayer game, or it's not a multiplayer game with a subscription in it, I think that kind of thing still applies, because you can still talk about these kinds of things with your friends when you're outside the game. And there are a number of other things, like it wasn't good value for money, and things like that, but actually they tend to be lower down, and it does seem to focus a lot more on the kind of social aspects, and also just having too many services. So there are so many subscription services now, not just games, but broader media services, and a lot of these are branching out into games and becoming these kind of one-stop shops for entertainment, I suppose, which is what we're seeing a bit more with like Amazon and Apple. And I think consumers are just a bit overwhelmed, and we're seeing saturation, I think. People are leaving because they want to sign up for other entertainment services, other game services, and I think generally we see more often people churning from a game service to use that money for an entertainment service rather than another game service. So rather than just competing with other game services, I think we're actually competing on a much broader landscape with other types of entertainment as well.
Exactly, and just like Netflix used to say, I don't know if they say anymore, that their biggest competitor is sleep. I think this is a bit the same here, is that we're not just, as a subscription, you're not just competing against other games, but all the other subscriptions. And one thing that both Apple and Google are doing really well, which I applaud as someone who works with subscription, is actually they give you a very nice way of managing your subscription, getting an overview and canceling them. I think that's the best way, the consumer-friendly way to do it, so I totally applaud it. And actually there's a lot of studies that show that the easier you make it to cancel a subscription, the more likely you are to retain your customers. And that's because they don't feel tricked, they don't feel sort of caught up in and that they can't leave, so they just want to leave. So that's make it easy to cancel your subscription as easy as possible, big button, and actually people will stay longer because they feel it's more fair. And I think one of the things you talked about churn, which I think is super interesting, about combating churn, is the idea of building a community on top of your subscription. We've seen it previously that you build subscription to monetize your community that you already have there, but I think we'll see, not this year being the big thing, but in a couple of years we'll start seeing that the big successful companies who have built a community on top of their subscription. I mean, it's still, I don't understand, there's probably really good reasons why Netflix doesn't have a real community, right? That you could have that if they invested in it and they sort of catered for it, you would have even stronger brand loyalty. They're really smart companies, so there's probably reasons why they don't that I'm just not aware of.
But I mean, they do on the TV space, right? And there's a lot of Netflix obsessives out there who are just really focused on what they're putting out,
yeah.
And so
exactly, I agree. The question is how much you are, I think, as a company, you are curating that, or maybe how to say, empowering that, or providing a platform for it. Because I know there are groups on Discord, etc., discussing this. But anyway, sorry, I stopped you talking about churn. What do you think about? You mentioned it a bit about having sort of a live ops mentality and constantly having to think about your game as a live ops, not as a one shot. Is there anything you've learned about churn, having now several games on different services, that these guys should be aware of?
Well, not so much, because we are not exposed to that kind of data,
Okay.
or so not so much from there. But just pulling from previous experience on EVE Online when I was at CCP, I think one of the things to think about is that like a lot of managing subscriptions is about reactivation. It's about like getting people back onto a subscription. So how do you create something that you feel that the player has a stake in or on, they have invested into the service, so that I may stop playing or I may stop paying for a few months or even a year, but I know there is something there that I can go back to, whether it's, in the case of EVE Online, it would be kind of my ships and my or whatever, but what is it that I feel like I can get back to that still has value? And I think, because I think anybody who is managing a subscription, a mature subscription particularly, a lot of what you're doing is managing reactivation. So that's something maybe to think about.
Yes, I would just want to say, as I said, we're going to take questions in a bit. We are getting to the last part. I have a few more that I really want to get in and sort of pick the brains here, but then just so you can prepare any questions you might have for our panelists. Because what I wanted to ask you about is that, as we've talked about, it's relatively new, even though you can go back to Hatch, or you can even go back to feature phones, and we had subscriptions for games, but relatively new in sort of the mainstream, which Apple has definitely paved the way for. Netflix is now making even broader, but we have Google Play Pass and other services as well. So still a relatively new model for us. Also witnessed by, we only have like this little track here. Maybe it's going to be even bigger next year. But it's a very young business model, but I'm sure there's some things that you already would love to change. Some things you already would like to course correct, where we are going with this new model to make it more sustainable, to make it more, dare I say, fair for the people who are creating the value in the model. And so any thoughts on that? Any changes you would like to see made to subscriptions, broadly speaking, already now?
Should I take that?
Yes, you can take that.
Yeah, so I think you've mentioned one of them, which is the case in many subscription services, but it's just to align the incentives of the developer and the platform owner, so that if it is about engagement, let's make sure that like people are exposed to that upside and they benefit from that engagement. And I think that's the case in quite a few of the subscription models. But the other one is data and access to data, and I think this is it's just a hard one to navigate, because how do you make sure that as a developer I can have the right view of data to make my game as good as possible for my players. And so platforms don't always share that information or don't give you access in the way that really allows you to optimize the game. And I think that as long as we don't find a way to do this on an ongoing basis or on a clear basis, I think this will hold back the kind of games that develop on those platforms, because because I think the industry has grown massively, and as a result of being able to adjust our games to player data, whether it's acquisition, whether it's engagement, and I think that continues to be a need that developers have in order to make the best games possible.
I think it's a really interesting point about access to data. This is why I typically group, as I said, Netflix and to some extent Apple Arcade, even though they're also a platform, as a very different thing from your in-game subscription, because it is about who's publishing the game, who gets access to the data, who can react on that, and that's really the sort of, the person who holds the information holds the power, right? And I think it's a very relevant topic for sure. Yeah.
One thing I would say is that I think, I don't know if it's really that relevant to what you were just talking about, but I think for some people, they just enjoy spending money on in-app purchases. They like spending money in games. A huge amount of money is spent in mobile games. That obviously comes from somewhere. And I think if you introduce a subscription, or like a subscription service in some cases, it's just not scratching that same itch for some kinds of people. And so maybe that's why it doesn't quite work for them. Some people just really like spending money in-game and find it very satisfying. And I think sometimes that maybe takes that away. But I can really see how subscription services work well for families, for example. The ones that take out the ads and the in-app purchases, because then as a parent you're not worrying about what your children are looking at and if they're going to be asking you to pay for things or accidentally buying things or being advertised to or anything like that. But yeah, I think there is something about in-app purchases that is just very, just really does it for some people, and being in a subscription that takes that away just doesn't really work for them.
I think that's a good point. I think that's why you go to a restaurant, there's a wine list, because you can choose which wine you want. We don't all want the same wine, and maybe some don't want wine at all. It's the same thing, I think, with some of the games that have very deep engagement, is that you want to allow people to pay according to how much they enjoy the game or want to spend in the game. Again, we're not talking about the bad kinds of monetization. That's, of course, that's not what we mean, and we're not talking about cheating people into buying thousands of pounds worth of something they don't need, or the kids getting extra credit card. Not what we're talking about. We're talking about happy, informed adults spending money on their hobbies, right? And I think some people like to ride a horse, go hunting, play golf. Those are expensive hobbies, and you probably spend more on those than you spend on a game. And to your point about a little bit snobbish, I think also we have just in general in the industry, one thing I would love to see changed is that if I spend, I don't know, £1,000 on golf equipment, no one's gonna, people say, okay, he's really into golf. If I spend that on a game, they're gonna pretend that I'm an idiot. Or they'll think I'm an idiot, right? Well, you get cheated by this game. Why is that? Both things are hobbies, both things I enjoy. I should be able to spend. So I think that's a good point in how we spend our money. But now that I just sort of took the ball into my court, I would say one thing that I would love to course correct, which makes me a little bit sad, is that we have set the price points as we did. I think Apple Arcade is $5. Apple Music is twice that. Why? Are games really that inferior to music that we have to price it at half? Do we not want to pay people the same amount just because we don't have like games industry cribs or whatever they show, so you can see how well we live as game developers? I think that's it annoyed the heck out of me. I can tell you when we started Unleashed, it was before Apple Arcade was announced, and we were out pitching to publishers and investors before we went public, or not went public, like out of stealth mode. And there we had a price point of €10. And then Apple launched at 5, and we just said, I guess we're at 5. That's because that's where you set the price point. Google Play Pass is even $2. Really? $2 for hundreds of games? I think I think we had a chance to reset and get away from the race to the bottom, and I think we've missed that. So I think now, just to piggyback on what you're saying about allowing people still to spend on in-app purchases and use the subscription as a baseline, I think is a great way going forward for most games. Not all games, but most games.
I was just going to say, I think pricing is such a difficult one because on mobile you're operating in this kind of free-to-play landscape. So anything with a price tag on it is going to look expensive compared to all the free content out there. And I think we see a lot of services, especially at the moment as we're in this kind of immature stage, really pricing their services extremely low. So GeForce Now, for example, is very, very cheap. Like, definitely not making a profit kind of cheap. And at some point, the prices are going to have to go up. And I think there are going to be a lot of disappointed consumers who are paying very low prices at the moment. And it's just a shame, like you say, that's where we're at.
Yeah, and it is of course a loss leader for Apple Arcade. We all know that, to sell more phones, and that's fair. Anyways, let's open up the floor for questions, if we have. There's one here first.
Hello. Hi, Maria. I'm Harvey, designer at the National Television School. I just wanted to ask you, so ustwo games, I'd say, is like a bastion in terms of the developers on mobile. Like, there's no higher caliber of quality, and you've been able to retain this premium model for a very long time, be it through subscription models. And you were talking about kind of the longer term retention, and with Destiny you're doing kind of extra content being added regularly. Is there going to be a point that breaks the camel's back and you go for the freemium and you go for the in-app purchases? Like, is there going to be the Monument Galaxy where you pay for whole new kind of sections of Monument levels? Yeah, just interested to see your consideration, or are you going to stay pure and only kind of premium content only?
If I understand your question, are you asking if we would be introducing in-app purchases in our games? Is that your question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we've already done paid updates for previous Monument Valley games. But right now we have no plan to make a game that's sort of a traditional free-to-play model. Was that your question? Did I understand it?
Yeah. And I guess it wasn't very open-ended, so yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think that we all just have to continue to explore what the magic is, right? I mean, what worked in 2014 isn't necessarily what's going to work today, and I think that as developers, even just from a creative perspective, we want to explore. At the time, Monument Valley did something that was kind of completely unexpected by making something beautiful on a mobile phone. Well, doing unexpected things is a little bit where we like to be, right? We like to try things, not just do the same thing over and over again.
Cool, thank you. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, last one, I'm afraid. But
the question for Maria really is, do you see, with the advanced subscription, do you see a couple of examples maybe of how you see games changing? Because, for instance, subscription in other media like TV or film is you do see, for instance, in terms of narrative, repetitive narrative, you see stories extended for time, and you also see at the same time a lot of repetition. I just wondered whether you saw, what do you see maybe as one or two of the creative impacts of increased subscription on nature again?
The short answer is I don't know. People have been talking about episodic for a very long time, so I think there's always, there'll be a space for episodic content, but I don't think it's going to be something that is radically going to surprise us, because people have been talking about episodic content for a long time. I think the biggest one is that idea of just for us and from where we're coming from is the focus on engagement and doing it, focusing on engagement in a way that is respectful of people's time. I don't know, other creative ideas, I don't know, I don't know that I can sort of see the future there. Sorry.
I think that's also the time we have, so you get out of jail free card there. Sorry, time's up, but I'm sure you can talk to Marie afterwards and get her to brainstorm some more. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking the time. If you want to know more about Unleashed, hop down to our booth downstairs and chat more. Thank you so much, Maria and Louise.